Hello, bonjour, Ani, and welcome to our first virtual New Year's Eve event. We are so happy that you were able to join us, and we have a lot of fun in store for you. My name's Rebecca, and I will be your hostess for the afternoon. I'm joined by my two colleagues, Dave and Grace. Say hi.
Hi.
Dave is actually joining us from our Thunder Bay office, and Grace from Sudbury. If you have any questions during the event, please feel free to send them to our comment section.
Bonjour tout le monde et bienvenue à notre célébration virtuelle du réveillon du jour de l'an. Nous sommes tellement heureux que vous êtes ici aujourd'hui avec nous et nous avons hâte de partager toutes nos activités amusantes avec vous. Durant notre événement aujourd'hui, vous pouvez interagir avec nous et nous poser des questions en écrivant des commentaires ci-dessous. On aime bien parler avec vous.
Before we begin, it is important to recognize where we are. We'd like to recognize that our Sudbury operations are on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Atitmishing Anishinaabeg, and our Thunder Bay operations are on the traditional lands of the Ojibways of Fort Williams First Nation. We would like to acknowledge the Robertson-Huron and Robertson-Superior treaties by recognizing that we are all treaty people and have responsibilities that fall within that. We'd also like to acknowledge that the Métis Nation of Ontario for their cultural contributions to this area. Now, finally, before we get to all the fun, I wanted to let everyone know that we have posted a materials list online for some experiments we are doing. If you would like to follow along with us live, you can find that list on our Facebook page. I also wanted to let you know that we will be having a contest where you can win a family day pass to the Science Center in Sudbury or a science prize pack, and we'll give you more information on that in a little bit. Without further pause, I'm going to hand the mic over to Grace. Take it away.
Okay, so for our first experiment today, we are going to take a look at something that we probably see a lot of on New Year's Eve, particularly if you've ever joined us at the Science Center for our New Year's Eve events. And that is confetti. Oh, you didn't see it. I'll do it again. There we go. So we see confetti all the time on New Year's Eve. And there's lots of different ways that we can shoot it. There's lots of different kinds of confetti. And today, if you want to follow along and make your own confetti cannon, you're going to need your empty toilet paper roll, some scissors, a balloon, and some scrap paper. You may also want to have some markers around to decorate your cannon as well. Now, I've mentioned that there's lots of different kinds of confetti. And what's really neat is historians think it actually started out with throwing leaves and flowers and then turned into things like rice, small candies, and even chalk pellets. And then finally, we transitioned to the paper type confetti that we're more used to seeing today. And that paper type confetti actually came because of silkworms, which that sounds kind of like silkworms and confetti. Where's the connection here? I'll show you. Silkworm manufacturers or silk manufacturers had silkworms to make the silk. And they had pages with perforations, so a whole bunch of holes in them, kind of like this. And the holes helped the silkworms come out of their eggs or out of their molten shells more easily. Now, when they make these papers with all the perforations in them, they end up with all kinds of little holes, right? If you've ever dropped a hole punch on the floor and all these little circles come out, you know that punching holes in paper, you make little paper circles. And one of these silkworm manufacturers or one of these silk manufacturers figured out, hey, we can actually use this. Let's stop throwing things at each other that actually hurt, like candies or chalk, and let's throw these fun paper colors instead. So let's make our own confetti cannon today. Actually, before we make our own, I want to have a look at how the one I used earlier, the ones we got from the store, work. It's actually a pretty simple machine. We've got the base here with the stick on top. We've got a spring. We've got a platform. And we have the casing. Now, the way the cannon works is that we take a look at the stick off of the base here. It's got this funny little shape on the top. And the hole on my platform actually has that same shape. So I can fit them together if I align them the right way. Then if I turn the base, I can actually get my platform stuck on it. If I add the spring into that equation, so we put the spring on top, Then we put the platform. I can push it down and lock it into place. So now I have this spring on the base and the platform is on top of it. And that spring is stuck in that compressed, that coiled up way. And it's got lots of energy because of that, because that spring, it wants to stretch back out, right? If you've ever played with springs before, you know they like to be stretched out a lot more than they like to be all squished up. So there's lots of stored energy in that squished up spring. Now, if I take the casing and I put it on top, and there's some little ridges in that casing tube there that I use to lock my platform in place. So my platform now inside the casing can't spin side to side, but the base still can. And when I spin the base and get the stick to line up with the hole on the platform is unlocked now. And the spring is allowed to uncoil, pop out, and shoot any confetti that's inside the cannon forwards. It's transferring its energy. So we can use the same concept to build our own at home. So here's where we're going to need our materials. Our empty toilet paper tube is going to act like the casing of our confetti cannon. And then our balloon is actually going to do the job of our spring, our base, and our platform all together. Now, if you want to, and you have some markers or pencil crayons around, you could draw on the base of your confetti cannon with your markers there. You can also use a cut off top of a water bottle if you don't have a toilet paper roll. So what we're going to do with our balloon is we're going to take our scissors and we're going to cut off that piece you would normally use to blow it up. So you don't need the little tube on the end. You just need the ball part on the bottom. So we're going to toss that part away. Now we just want this piece here. And you're going to stretch it out. And you're going to put it over the edge, over the top of your toilet paper tube. Like this. And you're going to want to make sure that it's pulled pretty tight. Like that. Now I find that my balloons are staying pretty well over my toilet paper tube, but if you find that your balloon is slipping off of your water bottle or off of your tube, you can add some tape around the edge here or an elastic to help hold it in place. So now we actually have our cannon ready to go. It was pretty easy. We need the confetti to go inside. If you have a hole punch handy, you can steal all the little pieces out of the inside like I did, or we can take our scrap paper and we just have to take our scissors to it. So you can cut all kinds of little pieces out, and you can do all different shapes and sizes. And when you have them cut out, I'll take a few that I just made there, and I'll take the ones I made earlier. Just toss them inside your confetti cannon. All right. So now, all you need to do to launch your confetti is grab that balloon at the bottom, and you're going to pull it down. So this is very similar to what happens with the spring being coiled, except instead of the balloon being compressed, it's been stretched, and it really wants to unstretch. So when I let it unstretch, all my confetti comes flying out of my confetti cannon. So there you have it. You've now got your own confetti cannon. Feel free to gather up that confetti you just shot around the room, put it back in, and keep your cannon handy so that you can participate in the final countdown at the end of the show.
Thank you, Grace. That was awesome. So I did have a question about our confetti poppers that we made. And it is, do you think that you could make one in an actual old medieval cannon, like a proper cannon, but make it a confetti popper?
I mean, I think if you put the right mechanics to it, you could. The cannon itself, the old medieval cannon, would act as the casing, just like our paper tube did, right? And then you just have to figure out a way to actually propel the confetti. So it may not be a spring or a balloon elasticized. You could maybe fit it with a fan so that when you turn the fan on, it blows the confetti, and that's how the confetti starts to go. So I think, yes, if you wanted to play around and practice your engineering skills, you could absolutely turn a medieval cannon into a confetti cannon.
You know, if we had a random medieval cannon laying around, we could practice. And I was also thinking that maybe that is similar to the premise of fireworks. And actually, on the topic of fireworks, we're going to pan over to Dave in Thunder Bay, and we're going to learn a little bit about another New Year's tradition that comes from some interesting chemistry. So over to you, Dave.
Hi. Well, I'm so excited to have you guys with me today, because today we're talking about my favorite subject, and that is explosions, because everyone loves explosions. And Grace and Rebecca have been kind enough to let me be the person who gets to do the explosions for New Year's Eve, because, as we all know, there's a lot of traditions around fireworks and explosions and lights in the sky for New Year's Eve, and that dates back a really long time, like a really, really long time. In fact, in Canada, it was actually a tradition that actually, if you had cannons and different forts would be fired off on New Year's to greet the New Year. And so things have gotten a little bit more exciting over the years with the addition of fancy chemicals to give things the beautiful colors in the nighttime sky of fireworks, which we might see a few of tonight. We might not, depending upon where you are and what's going to be happening in your sky. But have you ever stopped to think, what exactly is happening when you got an explosion? I mean, yeah, everyone knows. You see an explosion, you see a flash of light, you see some colors, but what is actually happening in the chemistry, in the physics that makes you able to see that? Well, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of that. But before we talk about how the explosions work, and we're going to get to that, we need to talk about light, because light's how we're able to see the explosions in the sky. And so we're going to start off talking about the very, very basics. And that is not lasers. There's actually a laser beam here, but you can't see it. But rather wavelengths of light. So here's the thing. Light is made up of vibrations. Kind of the same way that my voice is making vibrations in the air going towards you, the light reflecting off of me is going through the camera, getting turned into some fancy things, electrons, and being sent through and then being broadcast as light from your screens, and it's coming from your screen in straight lines into your eyes. Now, the thing is, different colors of light have different wavelengths. And so wavelength means how fast something goes up and down. So if you were to take light and you were to freeze it in a freeze frame, a color of light that looks red will look kind of like this. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. Compare that to how the color blue. It goes up and down, up and down, up and down. Oh, you can't see it because again it's we'll get the other way around. There we go. So red light has a lower wavelength than blue light, which means that the up and down happens a little faster for blue than it does for red. So when it goes into your eye, the things that are going up and down really fast, your eye sees as blue. Things that are going up and down really slowly, your eye sees as red. Different wavelengths gives you different colors of light. Sound good? Okay. Hopefully you're still with me, because we're now going to talk about fireworks. So when fireworks happen in the nighttime sky, you have a charge, and that charge has a whole lot of what's called an oxidizer. Oh, I talk about oxidizers. That's pretty important. So the thing is, to get that up into the sky, you have to have an explosion. So you have to have whatever's in there, get a whole bunch of compressed gas behind it, throwing it up into the air so it can erupt into flames of different colors. Now, most things, when they burn, they make a bit of gas, including things like campfires or candles or stuff like that. But the thing is, they don't burn fast enough to make a whole lot of gas all at once. So when you want to launch a firework, you need to use an explosive, which basically they burn really, really fast to make a whole lot of gas and a whole lot of heat, send something go flying. Anyway, but once in the air though, then it explodes. And the colors of fireworks are actually made by different kinds of chemicals. Like, for example, if you sit there and you're looking up at the nighttime sky and you see an explosion, and the explosion look kind of blue, what you're actually looking at are pennies. Well, not literal pennies. You're looking at copper. So inside and around all the stuff that's exploding, all the chemicals that are going to burn, you have a whole lot of copper salts. Kind of like it's like one part of it's like the metal that pennies are made out of, and that's when it burns, it kind of bumps into and makes a whole lot of small wavelengths of light that go up and down really fast, which go down to your eye and give you the blue color. If you're seeing things that are kind of yellowish in color, well, when you're looking at stuff that's covered in like sodium stuff, like kind of like table salt. Looking at things that are red in color that are exploding, well, you have stuff that's made mostly out of a chemical, an element called strontium. Anyway, and if you're seeing purple, you're seeing stuff like, that's made with potassium. If you're seeing like bright white fireworks, you're usually looking at a metal like aluminum or magnesium, all burning at once. So all these different chemicals give you different lights. Now, I can show you that here. Kind of. It's a little bit harder to see, but what I'm going to do is make it like it's midnight by turning off the lights. Give me just 1 second. Oh, the lights gotta go. And now the lights are off, we're going to do a little bit of chemistry. So in front of me, I'm going to set a gel on fire. Now you can't see it very well, but my gel doesn't want to burn. I got this special for today. So the gel that I have is burning with a very, very faint blue colored flame, which is not showing up well on camera, but watch what happens when I add a different chemical into the mix. This chemical I'm going to add is calcium carbonate. And calcium carbonate is a kind of salt. And when I add this to the flame, you'll notice our flame gets a little bit of color, which it's kind of hard to see. Look, you want to close it a little bit closely, but adding a chemical of calcium carbonate into the mix, it gives the flame a color as it is blown to make it a different color. Let's try that again with a different color. We're gonna move the center one here. I'm gonna set a center one on flame. Again, the flames in this case are very hard to see. And in fact, it's a burning of a chemical called methanol, so often they're invisible. I'm going to add another chemical in here, and you might be able to see a few bright colored green. Oh, and it went out. Let's try this again. Adding a little bit of copper into the mix. Oh, well, copper burns with a bit of a nice bluish flame, bluish green flame, but it's not showing up right now. All right, we're going to turn the lights back on. There we go. And so now, when you look up at the nighttime sky, when you see fireworks, you know what you're actually seeing is chemistry in action. As those charges explode to send up the shells into the air, and as the bright lights come off, you know that what's happening is there are different chemicals that are burning to give you the different colors of lights. The colors of lights are moving through in waves to your eye, and if you're seeing things like blue, they're moving into your eye up and down really, really fast. If they're seeing things like red, they're moving up and down into your eye really, really slowly. So that's a little bit about the chemistry of explosions. We're going to get into a whole lot more after our next topic, which Rebecca's going to introduce us to.
That was really, really neat. Thank you, Dave. So next, we're going to be going over our memories of the year with a bit of a twist. And to explain further, I will give the mic over to Grace.
Okay, hi again, everybody. So I don't know about you, but 2020 has been a pretty crazy year for me. And so much has happened in the past 366 days. And yes, 366. This year was a leap year, so we got an extra year out of this year. So a lot has happened, and I think a lot of us are probably totally ready to just say goodbye to 2020 and move on to 2021. But I think it's important to also recognize that there's a lot of good, cool stuff that came out of 2022. And what a better way to look back and keep a personal record on this historical year than to make a time capsule. So to make your time capsule, you're going to want some kind of container to seal it up in. So maybe an envelope, maybe a cardboard box, maybe a plastic container. It's going to depend on how much and what kind of stuff you want to put in your time capsule. Then you can think about what you want to put in your time capsule, right? So a letter to your future self might be a really great idea, or some photographs, some drawings, maybe a favorite toy or trinket, or even a mask to look back on this year, right? This year we all started wearing masks, and that's something pretty interesting that we might want to look back on in a few years from now. We've also got a couple templates that we've included on our social media. So we've got some guiding questions for you of ideas to answer to include in your time capsule. We have one in English, et on a une version française aussi pour votre capsule témoin. Now, while you're going through your memories and what you're excited for about 2021, we'd love to hear from you and have you share that with us. And this is where that contest that Rebecca mentioned earlier comes in. So send us a comment on the video about what one of the best things about 2020 was for you and something you're looking forward to in 2021. If you send us that comment with those two things in it, you can be entered into the draw to win either a family day pass to Science North or a science prize pack. Now, you have until the end of this year to enter, so make sure you comment before midnight tonight on December 31st, 2020, and then we'll let you know on Monday who the winners are. Now, when you comment your answer, make sure you also include which prize pack you'd like to go for. So do you want the Family Day Pass to Science North, or do you want the Science Prize Pack?
Perfect. Thank you, Grace. We will give everyone time to think of their answers and submit, of course. And as a reminder, please be sure to indicate which prize you are submitting for when you do write it in, whether it be the Family Day Pass to Science North in Sudbury or the Science Prize Pack, which you can pick up in Sudbury or Thunder Bay. If you don't live in Sudbury, you can still enter to win, and maybe next time you visit Sudbury, you can have an extra adventure. But we are going to head back to Dave for one of my favorite experiments where art and science are combined. And remember, you can follow along at home as well, and you can take it away, Dave.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what we're talking about next is the idea of time. So here's the thing. We all know that as time goes on, our year passes, right? Our Earth is slowly moving around our sun in a giant, giant circle. Well, actually, it's more of a sort of stretched and squished circle, but still, it's an orbit. When we come back to the place where we started, that's 1 year. And that's when we celebrate. But the question is, how do we know when exactly to celebrate? Because we aren't able to really get a sense of where the sun is in the sky or where we are just from looking up at the stars. It's actually very, very difficult. So we have invented clocks, which are very important for things like the final countdown at the end of the year. Now, the history of clocks is kind of cool. There are all kinds of different ways of telling the time. One of the simplest ones, and one of the earliest ones, is looking at the sun. If you have a sun, which as our Earth spins, is always in one place in the sky, the sun's light, if it hits something like a stick, will make a shadow, and that shadow will slowly move over the course of the day as the sun moves across the sky. That's a sundial, and it's one of the earliest ways of telling time. But there are all kinds of other cool ways, like, for example, having a clock that runs with water. If you have water drip, drip, dripping at a steady rate, you count the number of drips, you know how long it takes. That can tell you how long time has been. Or my personal favorite is a candle. Not just any candle, but a candle that has nails stuck into it. Believe it or not, this is a very simple clock, a candle clock. So the idea being that if you light the candle, and you know how fast your candle usually burns, as the candle burns down, the wax gets soft and melts and is burned away. So if you know how long your candle takes to burn from here to your first nail, then you can listen for the sound of the falling nail while you're doing something else in the house. When the nail falls down, you know that, say, 2 hours have passed. And then if the next nail may be an hour, and the next nail may be an hour, the third nail may be an hour, and then maybe it's midnight. So that's the simplest way of making a clock, is a candle with nails in it, which is kind of strange. But there are better ways. In fact, there are funner not being a real word, there are other more exciting ways of telling time. For example, using a disco ball. Yes, believe it or not, you can tell time while also being very, very groovy in terms of past generations. So you can take a disco ball, or really any kind of ball, and hang it from a rope, just like so, and give it a swing, like that. What you've actually done is made a kind of clock. So here's the, sorry about that. So here's the neat thing about things like disco balls. When they're hanging from a rope, they're called a pendulum. And a pendulum is a heavy weight at the end of a long rope that is allowed to swing on one end. So when I let go, the disco ball swings, and it comes back. Now, the thing about pendulums is that it always takes the exact same amount of time for this ball to make one complete swing from one side to the other. No matter where you drop it, I can drop it from way up here. I can drop it from right down near the end. Here, let me show you. I'll hold it up just off camera, and I want you to count to see how long it takes for this ball to get back to my hand. Ready? Go. 1, 2, 3. That took roughly 3 seconds. We can try the exact same thing. I'll drop it right here, right near the apex of the swing. Ready to count? And go. 1, 2, 3. The exact same amount of time with the weight being dropped from very, very different heights. So, and this is really, really handy. And it was used to make some of the most accurate clocks back, 200 years ago. Because if you have a pendulum that swings back and forth at the exact same frequency, going back and forth and back and forth, or ticking and talking and ticking and talking, you've got yourself a clock. And if you have a clock, well, there you go. You can tell exactly how much time has passed. And one of the neat things about pendulums, too, is that as they swing, the earth actually spins underneath of them. If you have a heavy enough weight and a long enough pendulum, and you let it swing, you can actually see this. The path of the pendulum will look like it's changing over the course of the day. It'll go from being, looks like back and forth, to almost being from side to side. But the pendulum isn't actually changing its course. The pendulum is swinging back in the same way, and the earth is spinning underneath it, which is kind of weird. But still, what we can do now is make some art using pendulums. And I hope that you might happen to have the ingredients needed. So, what you need to make some art with pendulums are a few simple objects. You've got to have yourself a cup, but I'm going to do it in a bigger style with a bucket. You need to have a rope. You need to have a hole in the bottom of the bucket, and you need to have some paint. Now, if you're doing this inside, you also have to have a whole lot of paper to cover up the floor so you don't make a large mess. But the best place to do this is actually outside. If you go outside and hang this from, say, hang a rope from the top of, say, an old swing set or a tree limb, or maybe from anything that's hanging up high, and you tie your cup to that overhanging tree limb, and you have fresh snow on the ground, what we can do is put a bit of paint in the bottom of our bucket. Or if you're doing it inside with, say, a cup with a hole in the bottom, you can make sure that there's a little bit of paint in the bottom of your cup, a hole in the bottom of your cup, and then when you let it swing, the paint will drip out onto, if you're inside a piece of paper, if you're outside, onto nice, freshly fallen snow. If you have it coming out nice and slowly, you can make some beautiful designs as it swings back and forth. Here, I'll do them with you right now. So you're going to want to add some paint to your bucket, making sure that the hole is covered while you add your paint. You want to add also a bit of water. Now the reason for this is paint is often very thick. If you're using paint like tempera paint, for example, you don't need to add it's a little bit thinner and comes out a little bit easier than what I'm using right now, which is actually an acrylic paint, which isn't the best thing to use. So if you have tempera paint, you'll want to use it. Now once water has had a chance to slosh around, I'm going to add a little bit more here, just to make sure that the paint is nice and liquid, so it sloshes around really well and is able to fall through the hole in the bottom of your bucket. And when you let it swing, the paint comes out in a steady stream and leaves behind patterns as it goes. Now, again, if we were to let this pendulum swing and it were super, super heavy and it were to be going all day long, it wouldn't just make a line. It would actually make a whole bunch of slow loops. But we don't have time to wait for that. So instead, I'm going to speed it up by adding a little more water, a little more paint, and giving it some different directions. Because after all, I put paper all over the ground in here. So with this, you can change the colors. You can add more colors into your mixture over and over again to make some really beautiful circles and spirals, kind of like a spirograph on the ground below your hanging bucket with a hole in it that's hanging from something overhead by a rope. That can give you things like these beautiful designs. Of course, I'm sure yours will be even better. Now remember, if you're doing this inside, make sure that your pendulum is short enough that it doesn't splash paint anywhere except for on the paper you're using. But if you do this, you've made both art, a pendulum, and technically a clock that can help you count down to the new year. Speaking of countdowns, we'll be talking about that in just a little bit. So go out, make yourself some pendulums. Take the time that you need to make this New Year special, and have fun with science with clocks. Back to you, Rebecca.
That was really, really cool. I was wondering what other types of creations we could make. And I was noticing that they're more circular shapes, but do you think that we would be able to get a square shape?
A square shape? Yeah. That would be pretty... Oh, the problem with pendulums is they only move back and forth in slow sweeping curves. I mean, if you were to grab your pendulum and you were to drag it to one side, to the other, and draw a square from above, you could do it, but a pendulum won't make that on its own. It has to be swooping curves and arcs and loops and that kind of thing. And unfortunately, pendulums can't do that. I wish they could, though.
Thank you. And I did have a question for Grace as well. And it actually doesn't have anything to do with pendulums, and it doesn't have anything to do with art, but I got this question asked to me and I didn't have the answer, and I was hoping you would. So how do scientists determine the makeup of faraway stars and planets? And what I mean by makeup is you'll see reports that scientists will find a planet that's mostly of diamonds or a particular type of gas, but it's so far away that I just don't understand how they would determine that.
Yeah, so it's actually really cool. The short answer is they use something called spectroscopy. Now, spectroscopy, what that is basically measuring light. And so it kind of comes back to what Dave was talking about earlier with how we've got the different colors of wavelengths, or different colors of light rather, have different wavelengths. So blue has the really tight ones and red has the kind of longer ones. So what astronomers and scientists can do is they can measure what colors or what wavelengths of light a planet is either letting off or absorbing. And each element in our periodic table will have a specific signature of what colors of light they'll be emitting or absorbing. And so they can use a tool called a diffraction grating, which just basically takes that light that's coming from the planet or the star, and it separates it out into its colors of the wavelengths, of different wavelengths. And then they can see where do those lines fall along the color spectrum, because our colors spectrum looks like this, right? It's our rainbow. So they can see, are there lines where the blue is? Are there lines where the red is? Are there lines where the orange is? And they can figure out, okay, what elements make that particular combination of colors? And that can help them figure out what elements are actually making up that planet or that star without ever having to visit it.
That is really, really cool. Thank you for answering that for me. So I've been having a lot of fun with everyone, and I hope you have too. And our next topic I notice is about how elephants brush their teeth, but that doesn't sound right to me. And I was hoping, Dave, do you have an explanation for me?
I sure do. But here's something I have to confess. We don't actually have an elephant inside my office building here. They wouldn't fit, and besides, it's just me here for the time being. So what we're going to be doing is a classic science demonstration called Elephant's Toothpaste. And we're doing this because, remember, I promised to tell you a little bit more about the chemistry behind explosions. So let's do it, shall we? But before I go too far into this, I'm going to put on some safety equipment. And the reason is going to be clear why in a second. So for this demonstration, I have to wear safety goggles. And I have to wear safety gloves. The reason is the chemicals that I'm going to be working with are, well, they're dangerous. The main one is called hydrogen peroxide. So on hydrogen peroxide, it's a kind of chemical that doesn't want to stay together. It's unstable, and so it wants to fly apart all the time. If you were to look at it and you were able to see it, which you can't, molecules are much, much too small to see with our eyes, but it would look like water with an extra bit of gas called oxygen stuck onto it. And so, well, an element called oxygen. And so this molecule is struggling and it always wants to fly apart. And so if you put it out in the sun, it will fly apart really, really quickly and make a whole lot of oxygen gas as the oxygen flies off, bumps into other oxygens that are also flying off other parts of it, and goes and floats away. So that's what's made by the reaction, is oxygen gas and then also water. Now, the thing is, if you get it on your hands, those oxygen bits that are flying off, they bump into parts of your skin, and they give you a bad burn called a chemical burn, which I do not want to have. Now, some people do put this onto their hair, though, in hair salons, where the people who are working with it also wear gloves, because it turns whatever it touches off into a kind of a bright white color. It's also something that's used to sort of get rid of stains. But I have some right here from just off screen, and in a bottle it looks like this. But you don't want to look at it in a bottle, so what I'm going to do is trundle in my handy dandy cleanup cart. So when I make a mess, I can roll it off screen, making sure everyone's able to see it here. All right. So I'm going to put a little bit of the hydrogen peroxide inside of a graduated cylinder. Now, a graduated cylinder means a cylinder that has a whole bunch of little markings on it. Those markings can tell you how much of stuff you're pouring in. So I'm going to pour in 10 milliliters of hydrogen peroxide. And hold it up to the camera. And can you see the reaction happening? No, you can't. This reaction happens really, really slowly on its own, where the hydrogen peroxide wants to fly apart into oxygen and water. It's constantly happening, but it's happening really slowly, and, well, it's making a gas. And our eyes can't see this gas because the gas just blends in with the other oxygen in the air. So we need to add an indicator. Now, the indicator, that means something that sort of lets us see the reaction is happening. So in this case, our indicator is going to be some soap. I'm going to pour a few drops of soap into the bottom over here. And I'm going to mix it up just a little bit. And so now what's going to happen is that soap is going to trap all the oxygen that's being made. So the reaction happens, the oxygen comes off, and it gets caught in bubbles. No, you're not impressed? That's fair. This reaction is also still happening very, very slowly. So we need to speed it up. Now, there are a few ways in chemistry to make reactions happen faster. One of them is to get it hot, but this is made of plastic, and that would not work for this. So we have to do the other way. The other way is to add what's called a catalyst. Now, a catalyst is a fancy name for a chemical that makes a reaction happen faster. The catalyst doesn't actually get involved. It's kind of like, a catalyst is like a knife, where it goes in and chops things apart or makes things go together again by squishing them together. But the catalyst itself doesn't get used up, so it can work again and again and again. Now, there are a couple different catalysts for this reaction. Some of them are yeast, like actual yeast that you can find in your cupboard. But what I'm going to use is a solution, which means it's dissolved in water, of a chemical called potassium iodide. So watch what happens when I add potassium iodide into this mixture. So potassium iodide makes it happen way faster, way faster. So what's happening inside all those bubbles is a mixture of oxygen and steam. It gets trapped in the bubbles, and, well, you can see it happening. And it looks kind of like a foamy mess that an elephant might use to brush his teeth. But neither an elephant nor I would ever want to get this on our skin or in our mouths. Because for all chemistry, you can never be 100% sure that you've gotten rid of everything that was in there. And remember what I said about what happens if it gets on your skin? It leaves a burn. So it would not be a good thing to brush your teeth. But now we've done a little one. Should we do a bigger one? Like, for example, should we do a really big one? Of course we should. All right, so I'll put this away. Off to the screen, being careful I don't get any of this onto my hands or to my skin, because, well, chemical burns are not fun. There we go. Just off screen. And we're going to do the exact same thing, but with a giant graduated cylinder. So, same thing. I'm going to pour in some hydrogen peroxide. Now, this hydrogen peroxide is not like the kind of hydrogen peroxide that you might find, say, in most hair salons. It's much, much more concentrated. What I'm pouring in here is actually 30% hydrogen peroxide. The rest is water, but with 30%, it is very, very dangerous. All right, okay, I'll get that a little bit more. After all, we want to get a nice big explosion. So pouring a little more in there. We are at about 75 milliliters now. Yeah, I believe we are. We're going to get up to 100. Oh, perfect. There we are. All right. So we got our hydrogen peroxide. Now, what do we add next? Oh, right. We need to add our indicator, that being our soap. So we'll add some soap in there into the bottom. Oh, this is going to be a good one. We'll swirl it up. Excellent. All right. Now, and because I want to make it look a little bit more like toothpaste, I'm going to add some food coloring, because there are some kinds of toothpaste that have coloring on it. So I'll make it a little more festive by adding some colors. I've got blue, and I've got a little bit of red. Put some along here. Excellent. And some along here, just like that. All right. Are you ready? Let's do it. All I'm going to do now is add a little bit of catalyst. Here we go. Well, 3, 2, 1, and let the reaction commence. So the catalyst is in there. It's making the reaction happen faster and faster and faster and faster until eventually you have enough toothpaste to take care of an elephant. Just like that. So that is the chemical reaction called elephant's toothpaste. Remember, not actually toothpaste, not actually for an elephant, but it sure looks like it, doesn't it? That's an example of the power of chemistry, the power of a decomposition reaction to make some pretty neat stuff. Now remember what we learned. When you take hydrogen peroxide and you add potassium iodide, it breaks apart to make water and oxygen. And that's going to be important later on. So back to you, Rebecca. We'll let this reaction react itself out.
Dave, before I let you go, can I just ask you a quick question about elephant's toothpaste, the experiment you just did?
You can ask me anything, for sure.
Can you tell me why I'm seeing steam come off of it?
Oh, I didn't mention that. Silly me. So when you have hydrogen peroxide and it breaks apart, there's a whole lot of energy. Remember I said they were struggling to fly apart all the time? Well, that energy gets released. And the way it gets released is in heat. So this is what's called an exothermic reaction. It means that when it happens, it makes heat. And that heat gets dumped into the environment around it. In this case, it gets dumped into the water that was produced and makes it into steam. So this exothermic reaction makes us a little bit, make everything get really, really hot. And that what's coming off is, in fact, steam. Okay. The other kind of chemical reaction that can happen is called endothermic, and that actually does the opposite, where if you have an endothermic reaction, that's something that actually sucks in energy from the environment to make it happen. Exothermic makes heat, endothermic sucks in heat, and this one is very exothermic.
Very cool. Thank you so much for answering that question for me. I did have a science question for Grace, if I could grab you for a moment as well. And this was a question I received, and I also did not know the answer, and I was hoping you could help me out. Are humans more genetically similar to cats or dogs?
Ooh, interesting. Okay, so we're going back to the age-old cat or dog debate.
Yeah.
Different than the are you a dog person, are you a cat person? It's a are you more of a cat or more of a dog, which is cool. So I did take a look, and we're actually pretty similar to both. So we share about 90% of our DNA with cats.
Oh.
And do you want to guess? Do you think we share more or less with dogs?
I'm going to just take a dice roll and say dogs.
No. So we actually share more of our DNA with cats. So we share 90% of our genes, of our genetics with cats, and 85% with dogs.
Okay, interesting. I wonder if that has to do with like predators or something like that, how we evolved.
I'm not sure. So part of that is thinking about, so our genetics, we have a ton of DNA in our bodies. Any animal or plant or anything has tons of DNA. And it only takes a tiny bit of difference for there to be big in the genetic code or in the DNA, for there to be a big difference in kind of what we look like or how our genes are expressed, right? So if we think about other humans, so my DNA and your DNA, for example, are probably about 99.9% the same. So that like 0.1% of difference is what makes us different genetically. So we're still humans, but we're not the same person. So that tiny little percentage of difference makes a big difference.
Interesting.
So it's interesting to see.
So before I let you go, I now have to ask, are you a cat person or are you a dog person?
I would say I'm a little bit of both. I grew up with dogs, but now I have my cat. So I see the benefit and I love both.
Perfect. I'm the same way. Well, thank you so much for answering that for me. And the time has come for our very awesome countdown into our new year. So I will ask you to join me in our biggest experiment yet in welcoming back the one and the only Dave.
Oh boy! Well, good to see you. This is going to be. I hope this is going to be exciting. So this is going to bring together all the things we talked about today to make a small explosion happen inside this box and blow out 2021. So here's how it's going to go. You remember what we talked about when it came to elephant's toothpaste, where we added potassium iodide into the hydrogen peroxide, and that gave us oxygen gas. So as it turns out, for a chemical reaction like the ones that happen inside fireworks, you need to have a whole lot of oxygen around to make things burn really quickly. And when things burn really quickly, they make a whole lot of heat and a whole lot of gas. So if we make a chemical reaction happen in here very quickly, making a whole lot of heat and a whole lot of gas, and it's a combustion reaction, we should be able to get all these pieces to literally explode out. Should we try it? Of course we should. So we're going to do this one a little differently. I have back here, along with my fire extinguisher, a little bit of a chemical of potassium iodide, but this is a little bit different from the stuff we had before. This potassium iodide is crystalline, so it means it's held in crystal forms. And inside of this container, I have a little bit of hydrogen peroxide. And so if I take a bit of potassium iodide, drop it through a hole in the back, I can get that chemical reaction that we talked about before happening. Now, there isn't a lot, just enough to make the oxygen gas. Because now we're going to add a bit of fuel. And the fuel we're going to add is a gas called butane. I'm going to stick that into the hole into the back of this container, and add some butane into the mix. All right, I'll let that go. Excellent. Putting my safety goggles on, and we're going to get you to count down with me using if you built a pendulum clock, well, you can use that. We're going to count down from 10. And on 10, I'm going to add a small spark of ignition. That's going to give just enough energy to get this particular reaction going, which will then get bigger and bigger as it releases more and more energy. Are you ready? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, probably help if I got the spark to work. Woohoo! Oh, only the one blew out. Well, still, that's better something than nothing. So I wish you all a very happy 2021 and an excellent new year.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. I absolutely loved it. So from everyone here at Science North, we really wanted to wish you a very happy new year, and we wanted to thank you so much for joining us. We had an amazing time, and we hope you did too. I would like to take a moment to remind everyone of the contest, and if you haven't already submitted, I encourage you to do so now. You have until midnight tonight, December 31st, 2020, and we will be announcing a winner on January 4th, 2021. And again, a huge, huge Happy New Year from everyone at Science North.
De tout le monde ici à Science Nord, on vous souhaite une bonne et heureuse nouvelle année. Merci beaucoup pour votre participation aujourd'hui. On espère que vous vous êtes amusés autant que nous. N'oubliez pas que vous avez jusqu'à minuit ce soir pour participer au concours en partageant avec nous la meilleure chose de 2020 et quelque chose que vous attendez avec impatience en 2021. Encore une fois, meilleurs vœux pour l'année 2021.
And again, I would like to say Happy New Year. If you have made your confetti popper, I encourage you to pull yours out and do this with us now.
I've got two, but I only have one hand, so I think I'm going to have to only use one of them.
Ready? 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year!